The man picked up a human head and kissed it, not because he was a pervert, but because kissing it could extend his life, though you would never guess that this head was still alive. It had already lived for nearly 1,000 years, and this was a world where humans and ghosts coexisted. Ever since humans passed laws to eliminate monsters, supernatural creatures had been driven out in large numbers, and a new profession was born: ghost hunters. People began to mistreat these supernatural beings, forcing ghost hunters and monsters to fight in arenas for entertainment. The man standing here was named Jing Qing, undefeated in the arena since joining, but all his glory was only on the surface. In private, his leader made no effort to hide his disgust for him, and as someone who killed monsters so often, the monsters naturally hated him too, so he was rejected by both sides, trapped in loneliness, and when he woke up with nothing to do, he would drown his sorrows in alcohol. The tavern owner told him that if he had money, he should go see a doctor and not waste it, and Jing Qing was confused, only to realize the marks on his body made the owner think he had some shameful disease. Jing Qing didn't explain and simply remembered a past he couldn't bear. Walking down the street, he saw villagers fighting with a little kitten, treating it as if it were a monster, but it was just a normal kitten. Jing Qing flicked the cat gently, and the kitten scratched him, proving it was indeed just a wildcat. That night brought another fight where the result was never in doubt, but this time something was different. He was being followed. Jing Qing asked if the follower had any ghostly feelings, and out of curiosity reached to check the birdcage the person carried. The maid immediately stopped him and displayed a strange divine power, then pulled out a hunting rifle and aimed it at Jing Qing. But Jing Qing remained calm, and with a clever move described in the divine script sequence, he poured his drink into the gun while the maid dodged his sword, completely ruining the rifle. With her gun ruined, the maid had no choice but to fight close up. Her blade arm was unnaturally sharp as it swept through the air, but suddenly the situation flipped. While Jing Qing was knocked into the air, the maid reassembled her rifle and nearly fired at him again, though Jing Qing dodged in time, only for the maid to appear right in front of him in a flash and land a flying kick directly to his face. Still, Jing Qing didn't feel disappointed. He pinned the maid to the ground, and she declared the fight over, blaming him for rashly touching her birdcage and warning him to be more careful in the future. Was this an apology or an order? Jing Qing felt annoyed, especially as the other side clearly had the upper hand. Seeing how much she seemed to know about him, he let her go and asked what she wanted. The maid told him he didn't have long to live, which left Jing Qing puzzled, and then she continued. No one would have thought this gentle-looking young man was actually a half-human, half-monster hybrid, but his body wasn't perfect, and the method of fusing the two sides had been too rough, making it hard for him to keep his mind clear. Soon, he would be completely devoured by the monster inside, losing himself forever. Knowing this much about him made Jing Qing consider killing her, but the maid stayed calm and proposed a deal. She could help Jing Qing extend his life, but he would have to agree to one condition. As she spoke, she drew closer with the birdcage, and Jing Qing finally realized that the person talking to him was not the maid, but the head inside the cage. The girl's name was Yaye, and the person next to her was her servant Jinti. Jing Qing asked if she was the legendary Immortal, rumored to be the only one in the world, and Yaye nodded, saying she was now 947 years old, her form frozen at age 14. But if she was immortal, why was only her head left? Yaye explained that half a year ago, someone stole her lower body, and she couldn't recover because she was wounded by a ghost, which could nullify a monster's regenerative power, though the attacker wasn't very skilled, so the damage was only half as bad. She never saw the attacker's face, only his hand, and he was a hoarse-voiced old man with a cane who spoke like a foreigner. Although Jing Qing was also a half-human, half-monster, he had more monster blood, so he should be able to kill this enemy. Meanwhile, the show in the marketplace ended and the crowd poured out, forcing the three of them to move their conversation elsewhere. Yaye asked why Jing Qing both longed for death and yet wanted to live. As it turned out, the more Jing Qing used his power, the easier it was for the monster inside to swallow him. But he kept fighting in the arena anyway. Wasn't that a kind of death wish? But if he wanted to die, why did he still resist when attacked? Jing Qing didn't answer at once, only saying coldly that if he was ever truly devoured, it would be in the midst of the most thrilling fight against monsters, surrounded by despicable, bloodthirsty enemies. But now, learning his life could be extended, he dropped his death wish. Yaye couldn't help but marvel at what a strange man Jing Qing was, joking about his own life. After a while, Yaye brought up the idea of killing her again, but Jing Qing refused. He didn't want to kill her, but to help her get her body back. Yaye said her enemy was too far away, probably in Europe, but if there was even a small chance, she was willing to try. For Jing Qing, though, this was about more than that. The cane used by the attacker was inscribed with Imo, the same as the one used by the person who once kidnapped him and turned him into a half-monster, half-skeleton. They shared a common enemy. With that, Yaye agreed and told Jing Qing to let her out, promising to immediately fulfill her promise to extend his life. To do so, Jing Qing would have to eat a piece of Yaye. Her cells, as an immortal, had extremely strong resistance and could boost the human part of his immune system. But the idea of eating her flesh disgusted Jing Qing, so the best way was through tears, snot, sweat, or saliva. Unfortunately, Yaye rarely sweated or cried, so only her saliva and snot were available. And of course, saliva was the clear choice. And so, under the moonlight, the two shared a kiss. In eastern France in 1898, a hunter was tracking a moose, but after missing a few shots, the man leapt a huge distance and caught the moose barehanded. Because he wasn't human, he was a vampire. He only used the rifle to blend in with humans. A wildcat nearby didn't agree, recalling the cruelty of humans who had attacked them not long ago. But her father had a different view. Precisely because of this, they had to be even more wary of humans. Seeing the friendly side of these creatures, the wildcat's father felt there was hope for humans, but as they returned home, they found the warehouse lock had been pried open, and on the ground lay a silver nail, its fresh blood still steaming. Even though vampires are powerful, some had fallen victim to a ruthless hand. Goddard quickly called everyone out. His eldest son was the first to ask what happened, but it was only the butler. Goddard asked if he had noticed anything strange, and the butler needed to think carefully. Meanwhile, the old woman was singing in the laundry room with the youngest daughter, and this made Goddard's heart ache, because the only one still unaccounted for was his wife. With a heavy heart, he opened the bedroom door, only to be greeted by a cold corpse. The next day, crowds of curious onlookers gathered at Goddard's house, each with their own opinion. Some thought it was a warning to the Kihei sect, while others suspected a spy's plot. A young reporter asked Goddard for his thoughts on the incident, and since the police had done nothing, he was extremely angry, so he decided to hire a detective himself. Lately, an Eastern duo had become unusually popular, none other than Yayan and Jingjing, also known as the Bird Dragon Messengers. Despite their fame, their pockets were empty, unable to pay for either their horse or their fare. Jingjing planned to weasel out by making excuses, like returning goods to make things difficult for the driver, but Yayan told him not to trouble the driver, since the driver would get scolded by his wife for spending a week at the tavern. The driver was shocked. How could he know such a thing? In the end, Jingjing pushed the bill onto Goddard, making him pay. Yayan immediately switched to work mode, first understanding the family structure, then going to the scene to check things out. The wife had been human for the first 20 years, becoming a vampire later, and she liked repairing things in life, so the castle was often filled with the sound of grinding iron. Yayan immediately noticed the two swords hanging overhead and asked if they were just decorations, but Goddard denied it. Vampires heal quickly, so there's no need for decorative weapons. The wife's body had decayed rapidly, so she was buried quickly, and now Yayan and the others could only rely on photos to reason things out. The wound was about 10 centimeters, looking like it had been made by a silver nail, and the left side of the wound bled less than the right. Her expression at death was very peaceful, as if she'd been hurt in her sleep. Yayan checked the chair and found no marks, meaning the weapon hadn't gone through her body, which suggested the attacker was extremely skilled at hiding their presence. Then came the issue of holy water. When a vampire dies, their cells lose vitality over time, so even if touched by holy water, it wouldn't hurt, which means the holy water must have been sprinkled right after the injury. Yayan also found a bottle, still dirty with bloodstains on the cap, showing it had been touched after the crime. Yayan asked about the silver ingot found in the warehouse, which apparently came from a hunter. Was the ingot stored in a box? Goddard said he'd been holding it in his hand. Finally, if a vampire touches silver or holy water, they get burned. Could this be avoided by wrapping silver in cloth? Goddard said in theory, yes, but vampires feel heat just by getting close, so none would touch it, and their healing wouldn't work on such wounds. After learning all this, Yayan first assumed the murderer was an outsider and raised some doubts. First, why did the wife, whose hearing and smell were far more sensitive than a human's, not detect the attacker? Second, why strike at night when vampires are weaker during the day? Third, why throw the holy water bottle at the scene? An inside man would use a coat to shield the blood spray, but the bottle wasn't a burden. Leaving it was suspicious. Fifth, why return the silver ingot to the warehouse after stabbing? All these questions gave Goddard a headache. There were two more points Yayan didn't mention. The vampire family offered them dinner, and just as the rumors said, they drank only blood but didn't like it fresh. Two of the sons thought Yayan and Jingjing were just frauds, but they soon proved their abilities. The driver wondered how Yayan knew about his wife's missing item, and Yayan explained he'd deduced it from the clothes. The driver's belly had turned black, the stitching coarse, showing it was often dirty, and his wife always scrubbed it hard. Only someone who regularly spilled food would have this problem. People who didn't eat wouldn't make this mistake. Only those guilty of overindulgence, plus his beard was messy, his collar clean, and his buttons sewn back on. All signs his wife constantly looked after him. Finally, the vest had last been washed a week ago, but his belly had no new stains, meaning he hadn't had a drink in a week. Yayan reminded him to cherish his wife, and the driver nodded, sobbing with gratitude. It was like Holmes himself was here. Even A had heard of this reputation, though he thought Yayan was weird and wanted nothing to do with him, not knowing he'd someday work a case with Holmes himself. Now, to business. When the wife's body was found, it was already 1:30 a.m., so at midnight, was Goddard's family eating? Goddard nodded. They finished at midnight, and his wife went to her room to rest while Goddard went to his second-floor study to talk with his eldest son. The youngest daughter played with her doll nearby. After 1 a.m., the three left the study and parted at the main hall. Every Monday at that hour, Goddard would go out hunting, and when he went to the warehouse to get his gun, everything was normal, so the wife could have been killed after that. As soon as he left the castle, his younger son joined him, and after that, they were never apart. The strongest evidence was the 3 empty gun chambers. Hearing this, the eldest son was surprised because he remembered hearing gunshots from deep in the forest after they'd separated, and he'd gone to his room. The youngest daughter was singing again, so he handed her to the maid to avoid the noise. The night continued with Black Knight questioning the younger son, which annoyed them, but Yayan still believed the culprit was among them. The younger son could only confess. Before 1 a.m., he was in his own room, but at the time of the crime, he was with Goddard. However, Goddard said there was a gap of time between the warehouse and when he left the castle. How could that be explained? The younger son insisted that even a vampire couldn't do all that in just 1 minute. Black Knight asked if he'd heard any sounds in his room, and the younger son shook his head like a divine thunder maid. At midnight, he'd finished lunch. At that time, he was cleaning up in the kitchen, and by 1 o'clock, he went to the laundry room. On the way, he ran into the little daughter, who seemed a bit bored, so he took her along and they sang together in the laundry room. During that period, he went to the bathroom once for about 1 or 2 minutes, and the little daughter nodded, confirming his testimony was true. Finally, there was the butler. After dinner, he went straight to the basement office to organize Goddard's work schedule and didn't move from that spot, nor did he hear anything out of the ordinary. After comparing everyone's stories, after 1 a.m., only 2 people couldn't prove where they were, the butler and the eldest son. Goddard was furious, insisting neither of them would ever kill his wife. When the topic of their mother's death came up, the little daughter was heartbroken, and dinner ended there. Yayan made arrangements to have the butler and maid watched, but then the eldest son stopped the two and warned them, though Yayan and his companion didn't care. The two headed into the forest to investigate, when suddenly, someone ambushed Goddard. The attacker hit Goddard directly, but since he was a vampire, he instantly healed. Even though he didn't like attacking humans, if someone came for him, he had to show the terror of vampires, and with just one move, he subdued the assassin, believing this was the person who killed his wife. He quickly blocked the man, noticing this person had only arrived in town that day and had mold on his elbow, probably from leaning out a train window for a long time. As expected, when they searched him, they found a train ticket showing he had started his journey 3 days ago, the same day the Countess was murdered. After ruling him out, Yayan questioned the assassin and found out something important. Not long ago, someone named Yuguo had attacked Goddard to avenge his own defeat, and this man had come to get revenge for Yuguo, who'd been confident because he had powerful help. Yayan asked the assassin if he knew Yuguo had a silver spike, but the assassin knew nothing about it. With all the facts in hand, Yayan told Goddard to let the assassin go. After this experience, the man would never dare attack a vampire again. Then Yayan gathered everyone and announced the killer was among them, filling in more details about his earlier doubts. At the time of the crime, both the eldest son and butler had been near the wife's room, yet neither heard any noise, meaning the murderer had gripped the silver spike by hand, using only strength to stab the wife in the chest. The killer didn't use a hammer because if they had, the butler and eldest son would have thought the wife was fixing furniture. This proved the murderer was worried about damaging the weapon, so the weapon wasn't a silver spike, but something else. Another question was about the glass bottle. Why was there dust inside? If it held liquid, there shouldn't be dust. This was a trick by the murderer to confuse everyone, but there were still traces of holy water on the wife's body, so there was only one truth. The killer used holy water taken from a church, froze it into an ice spike, then sneaked back to the castle under cover of night. Slipping into the wife's room, they stabbed her heart with the specially made ice spike. Since it was made of holy water, the ice spike would heat up and melt quickly. Afterward, the killer used a container to collect some of the wife's blood. When everything was done, the killer staged the crime scene to make it look like an outsider did it, leaving the blood-soaked coat and the glass bottle at the scene before silently leaving the room. Then the murderer waited for Goddard to go hunting, took the chance to break the storeroom lock, found the silver spike, and poured the wife's blood onto it to make it look like that was the murder weapon. All of these complicated steps showed the killer needed a strong alibi to clear suspicion, and to pull it off required speed and strength. Otherwise, the wife, being a vampire, would have noticed instantly. As the truth slowly surfaced, the youngest son still tried to bluff his way through, refusing to admit anything until the end. With no choice, Yayan described the killer's features again, saying that after pouring the wife's blood on the silver spike and setting it in place, the killer accidentally burned himself, leaving a scar on his finger. But the youngest son's hand had no scar because, after getting burned, he returned to his room and cut off his injured finger with a sword. Since he was a vampire, as long as his heart wasn't destroyed, he could regenerate any part of his body. Seeing his plan exposed in front of everyone, the youngest son became furious and attacked, heading straight for Yayan, but he had picked the wrong opponent. Next came a real one-sided fight. Yayan handed Miss Yayan to the maid, then, with one hand, threw the youngest son out the window, took off his coat and shoes, and calmly prepared to send him to the next world. The youngest son, not willing to give up, used his legs to spring back from the ruins and kept fighting, but it was clear Yayan was just toying with him, like a cat playing with a mouse. The youngest son's face was no longer so relaxed. For the next 10 minutes, the battle was totally one-sided, and before long, the hero had finished him off and returned inside. Goddard couldn't accept the truth, and Yayan could only offer a few words of comfort. No one could endure something like this. After the case of the vampire count was closed, the duo set off for London. The hottest topic recently was a warning letter from Little Rabbit, stating that tomorrow night before 11, he would steal the town's treasure from the collector, Mr. Fox Mansion. If this were an ordinary thief, Fox wouldn't care, but the letter was found by the famous thief Robin, and rumors said that if Robin wanted something, he would always get it. There was even word that he'd found the legendary Phantom of the Opera, Eric, as his partner. The news quickly attracted the public's attention, and everyone wanted to see how Fox would respond. Of course, Fox wasn't going to just sit back. He invited famous detectives, not only the mysterious birdcage messengers, but also the renowned Holmes and even the local law society, a police force with 200 years of history, whose 7 members were all experts and once hired, never failed. Once they accept a case, this law society will stop at nothing to protect their client's property, and even Robin has been troubled by them before. This time, Fox was facing 2 separate threats, and as soon as the 3 groups met, none respected the others, thinking Fox's precautions were far too elaborate. But Fox understood just how terrifying Phantom Thief Robin really was, and the mansion's tight security still wasn't enough to give him peace of mind. He led the witnesses down to the basement where the treasure was kept. The structure extremely complex. Not only did it take 4 people operating together just to unlock the door, but even taking out the treasure required solving an even more intricate lockbox. When Fox finally took out the treasure, everyone stared in awe. This gemstone was called the Second to Last Night, and its beauty amazed the entire group. No wonder Robin had set his sights on it. He also noticed the lockbox was specially made and asked about the jewel's origins. Fox explained he'd gotten the gem and the box together 20 years ago when a friend dug them up from some ruins and passed them on. It took him 10 years just to figure out the lock's code, but before he could truly enjoy his fortune, he was puzzled by the inscription on the black diamond. He'd researched its history and learned that a once prosperous dwarf tribe was suddenly massacred by werewolves. To get revenge, the dwarves created the black diamond and wrote the werewolves' hiding place inside. Now, it was clear why Robin really wanted the diamond. The next morning, when Watson opened the door, he saw Holmes reading the newspaper on the sofa. Watson tried to discuss their plan, but Holmes seemed unusually relaxed, leaving Watson confused until Holmes's brother walked in, immediately asking who this man was. Just from the length of his fingernails, the brother could tell this was a fake, and when the imposter Holmes tried to talk his way out, the real Holmes entered. With his disguise exposed, Robin had no choice but to reveal himself, removing his mask and admitting his true identity. He picked up a lock from the table and asked Holmes if he could open it, but before Holmes could respond, Robin had already unlocked it and tossed it over, issuing a clear challenge. He declared there was no lock he couldn't open, so Holmes shouldn't waste his time. With that, he leapt out the window and landed on the Phantom of the Opera's carriage, vanishing into the night. Meanwhile, Jin Xing was still admiring the scenery by the lake, and spotting a snack vendor, eagerly rushed over. Yaye asked her companion to find out where London's Spicy House restaurant was, and neither of them noticed the old man nearby with a birdcage identical to Yaye's. As expected, Yaye's cage got switched by mistake. When the old man opened it, he was so shocked he threw Yaye out, and just then, a car happened to pass, running over Yaye and splitting him in 2. Luckily, he was immortal, and after a while, he was perfectly fine, but the 2 men nearby became very interested in him. Meanwhile, Jinky was searching for Yaye and ran into Robin's group. Once they learned he was looking for something, the 2 decided to help him search, neither side yet aware of the other's true identity. At the next intersection, they spotted the car holding Yaye hostage and gave chase, passing right by Yoshino, who leaped onto a rooftop and easily stopped the fleeing car. Yaye was rescued, and with 3 now reunited, Robin realized they were the bird dragon messengers. What a small world. Yaye immediately recognized Robin, and the 2 sides started fighting without a word. Robin threw out a bag of marbles that transformed into bizarre shapes, launching them at Jingjing, who thought she had everything under control. But Robin's little trick fooled her. In a flash, Jingjing was struck on the chin and lost consciousness. Robin warned the 3 not to interfere and left, but Yaye knew the real show was just beginning. Soon, night fell, and there were 3 hours left before Robin's planned break-in. The mansion's defenses had already been activated at every level, and even Holmes needed to prove his identity to get inside. Holmes brought with him the police captain specialized in catching Little Rabbit and led everyone inside to deliver a letter. Yaye and company were already hidden on the rooftop, while 2 Law Society members stood guard outside. Holmes was naturally assigned to the basement, and once the main door was locked, everyone sat around the jewel, quietly waiting for Robin's arrival. At the appointed hour, a massive explosion echoed out, sending the guards rushing to investigate, but they found nothing. One guard even had his uniform stolen. Holmes quickly acted, pulling out his gun and destroying all the locks on the inside. Robin had said he could open any lock, but what if the lock didn't exist in the first place? Then there'd be nothing Robin could do. Just as everyone thought everything was secure, the basement suddenly shook. Water started pouring in through the ceiling's ventilation pipes because the outer wall at the tower's base had been blown open, and water from the Fire Dust River was flooding the vault. Holmes was stunned. Could Robin swim in like a fish? At that moment, Law Society Agent Number 7 smashed a hole in the outer wall with brute force, and as the river water poured out, the water level inside the vault dropped, but both the diamond and the box were gone. At that moment, the clock struck 11:30. Robin's operation execution had been perfect, leaving the detectives completely baffled. Still, if Robin hadn't yet escaped the castle, as long as they guarded the bridge and main entrance, they might get the diamond back. On the way out, Holmes suddenly sensed something wrong, borrowed a pair of handcuffs from the captain, and pinned him to the ground. Everyone was shocked, but Holmes revealed the person before them was actually Robin. Robin's earlier visit hadn't just been a provocation. He'd disguised himself as Holmes to fool the other detectives into thinking Robin's disguise was nothing more than a wig and fake nose, thus easily getting past Holmes's check. Then, by manipulating the locks, he made the detectives focus on breaking them, making his water attack work perfectly. The Phantom of the Opera unraveled a rope down the river's current, and in the chaos, Robin tied the safe to the rope's end so it could be quietly pulled away without anyone noticing. Robin carried the diamond out of the house, but fortunately, Holmes had planned ahead. He had already hidden the diamond inside Dr. Watson's coat. Even so, Robin's escape plan still threw off their efforts, and in full view of everyone, Robin managed to slip away. Out in the courtyard, Robin met up with the Phantom of the Opera, but the safe suddenly lashed out at him, and before he could react, Jing-Qing swooped down from above and snatched it back. It turned out that Yaye had realized Robin had mistaken a newspaper reporter for himself, and decided to use this, instructing Jing-Qing to pretend to lose on purpose to put Robin at ease. Then Yaye found Fuck and asked to take the place of the diamond inside the safe. Robin was full of information on his side, while Yaye's group had 3 people plus the Phantom. But before the fight could even start, the Phantom ran away, leaving Robin dumbfounded, and the moment the action began, he was instantly embarrassed. Meanwhile, Law Society Agent Number 5 arrived at the scene, but he wasn't there to help anyone. He deeply hated both monsters and Phantom thieves and just wanted to stab everyone present. What they didn't know was that outside the castle, the stone bridge had already been blown up by Professor M, who was also after the diamond. All his underlings, just like Jing-Qing, were experimental subjects, not only full-bodied, springy vampires, but also a fiery man who could ignite with a single point. Before long, the fireman encountered Holmes and Yaye, who had arrived just a little too late, and the two sides immediately started fighting. The female vampire lifted up her target, Jinju, who really didn't want to waste time here since her task was to chase down the Phantom, but the vampire wasn't going to let her go. The Phantom, though, managed to shake off Jinju's pursuit, only to be targeted by Agent Number 7, making things even more chaotic. After a series of tangled battles, Robin realized it was pointless to keep dragging things out. With 3 factions fighting, it would be better to team up to eliminate one side. With just a look, Robin and Jing-Qing formed an unspoken agreement. One would act as bait, the other would set the ambush. Robin's plan worked perfectly, and her quick wit pushed her enemy to the breaking point. Just as Agent Number 5 was about to strike, Robin ambushed him from the 2nd floor, knocking him out cold. Meanwhile, Agent Number 7 was lured by the Phantom into a dark, low-visibility area. Is her home turf, since she'd lived underground since she was 16 and mastered both voice projection and sound detection. In this field, it was almost impossible to beat her, and soon Agent Number 7 was sent flying from above, landing right where Jing-Qing and the others were. By then, Agent Number 5 had broken free, expecting a 2-on-3 fight, but suddenly, Jack the Ripper crashed through the window, launching a terrifying attack. Blood-red illusions froze everyone in place. Jack took advantage and grabbed the diamond. When the others snapped out of it and tried to snatch it back, Jack was even faster. With just one swipe, he sliced Agent Number 7 to pieces, and as Agent Number 5 tried to counterattack, Jack knocked him out with a single slap. Such a terrifying opponent sent Wei and the Phantom fleeing at once, leaving only Jack and Jing-Qing on the scene. Meanwhile, Jinju, though she held the upper hand against the vampire Carmilla in brute strength, couldn't match her for trickery, never imagining someone would smear aphrodisiac poison on their lips. Earlier, Jinju had accidentally touched Carmilla's lips, and that special toxin, once contacted, would paralyze and overheat the victim until they lost all resistance, becoming nothing more than a plaything for the one who used it. I'll just spare you the details of that scene. The fireman was utterly overwhelming, as expected from one of the old man's stitched-up experiments. Not only could no human stand against him, even other monsters were knocked aside like toys. Still, facing Holmes, brute strength wasn't his best option. During all this, Yayan asked the fireman why he was hunting for werewolves, and the fireman replied that their organization was expanding, so they needed to collect different kinds of monsters. Yayan immediately realized his own body must be with them. Holmes cut in, noting that, generally, experimenters always carried a vial of antidote. Holmes planned to use the chaos to arrest him, but the opponent was far too fast. Before he could act, Professor Moriarty made his grand entrance. Holmes immediately recognized him. Years ago, they'd fought beside a waterfall, and Moriarty's organization had been wiped out 8 years ago, yet here he was again. Moriarty was surprised to see Yaye too. Though Yaye was immortal, to have tracked him down as just a severed head was an incredible feat. Moriarty explained his return. It was all for a student he'd accidentally picked up, someone who desperately craved a strong body, and so he'd asked Moriarty to teach him transplantation surgery, to merge monster organs artificially and create a stitched-up being. Inspired, Moriarty began searching for ghosts and immortals. immortals. If his experiments worked, he could create beings with intelligence, strength, and regeneration. That student was the man who committed the perfect crime in Whitechapel 11 years earlier. Moriarty began extracting cells from ghosts and transplanting them into healthy young men, but most subjects developed colored markings matching the ghost's skin along their arteries, with their hair and eyes changing too. Their physical abilities increased drastically, but the high ghost concentration caused most to be consumed by the monster inside. Of all his subjects, Jack achieved the perfect balance, and Moriarty was amazed to find the Immortal's body was also an artificial creation. Not only that, but Immortal cells granted Jack incredible immunity, which counteracted the negative effects of the ghost cells. This powerful resistance inspired Moriarty to try fusing even more monster genes, and so the hunt for new monsters began, vampires included. Jack's regeneration became even more powerful, and he no longer feared silver, holy water, or sunlight. Now it was easy to see why they were after the diamond, and their next target would be werewolves. What they didn't expect was that Jin Xing, another experiment, had survived with no help, but compared to Jack's monstrous strength, Jin Xing had no chance and was brutally overpowered the whole way through. Perhaps because Jin Xing survived by sheer willpower, Jack didn't feel the urge to kill him. Seeing he'd lost the will to resist, Jack fired a signal flare to announce his victory, forcing Carmilla to retreat as well. And when Professor Moriarty saw the signal, he boldly chose to withdraw too, sighing over today's defeat. In the chaos, Phantom Thief Robin also escaped, losing even the diamond and forgetting about the safe that had been recovered by Yaye. Meanwhile, Jack believed his mission had gone perfectly, but when he checked his pocket, he found it empty. He never imagined Jin Xing had stolen the diamond in the fight. They held the diamond up to a streetlight and saw a red glow inside, revealing a map to the Forest of Fangs, the territory of the werewolves. So Yaye and his friends set off for Germany to search for the werewolves. So if you liked this anime and want a part 2, let me know in the comments. I'll upload part 2 right away.